So I've got my two substrates here, which I'm going to treat as two separate canvases, I think, but just need to put them here so the camera can actually get both of them at the same time. And I've also just mixed some colours. To be honest, I've just chosen colours that I fancied using. They're quite bright. You might want to refer to the colour wheel. You might want to create a colour scheme. So for example, using opposite colours like blue, violet, yellow, orange, and then perhaps putting some red in. Or you might want to use this colour green and think, well, what's going to go with that? And then look opposite and see what the complementary colour is. So you might want to use this as a reference, or you might just want to kind of choose your colours on gut feel. It's entirely up to you how you wish to do this. There's no kind of rhyme or reason, because really all we're doing is we're just going to follow our instincts. So I'm going to just take a flat brush. I'm just going to lay some colour on here. This might take a couple of coats of colour to actually get to something which covers the substrate, because we've not prepared the substrate first of all. We've only really just started to put the colour down, and I'm going to spread my colour quite thickly as well, and I'm kind of going from colour to colour at the moment. You almost mix on the surface as well. I've also put some golds and silvers in here too. And depending on what brands you use, you're going to get different coverage with different types of paints as well. So you might want things to look quite smooth, or you might want things to look quite textured, and that's entirely up to you. Now all these colours are analogous, so we don't need to worry too much if we're dipping the brush from one to the other. It's okay. You can just pull that paint off of the brush on the surface. We don't need to worry about creating anything that's particularly uniform or special. And sometimes when you work in this very random way, you actually get some really interesting results, because you're not really thinking about what you're doing. What you're doing is just laying down colour, which is quite nice. So yeah, you can get lots of different effects. So you might want to start off with colours which are quite similar to each other, and then once these are dried, lay down perhaps some cool colours. Or you might want to work on more than one surface and do some which are cool and some which are warm. So for example, if I wanted to do more cool colours over here, I could just use a new brush and then put some of those colours in there. Also got this nice green. You can kind of mix these on the canvas. So can you see what I'm doing here? Just being really random in the way that I place these, because we're going to kind of work from instinct and sort of imagination, and just sort of looking at colour as well, and what we like. What colours do we like next to each other? What colours don't we like next to each other? It's a way for you to kind of explore what you've got in your arsenal of paint supplies. You might have colours that you've not used before, or you might want to do what I'm doing here and mix some neutrals in. If we're using very bright colours and then we put neutrals next to them, so things like a grey or like this kind of sort of vanilla-y colour, sort of blush vanilla colour, it can actually make the brighter colours look brighter. It just has that effect, which is quite a nice thing to explore. You can see I'm being quite random about how I do this. So I'm holding this up so you can see. So I'm not really thinking much about what I'm doing here, which is quite a nice way to work. You can, as I say, blend those colours on the surface of your substrate. Don't have to worry too much about making things precise, or if you want to kind of put a bit of colour next to something else, you can. If you want to sort of work over the top of something, you can, while it's still wet. So I might want to come back in here and use some of that warm if you're going to work like this, just be careful. If you're going to go over a wet, cool area with a wet, warm area, you're probably going to get some blending like this, you see, and sometimes it can create secondary colours. So just be careful how you're applying your colour to your surface. So I want to go in really bright here. Use something a bit more. So I've mentioned before as well about having darker colours towards the bottom of a composition because it grounds the composition. So that might be something that you like to observe and experiment with, or it might be something that you want to completely break the rules on, and that's entirely your choice. The other thing you will find, as I said, is that some colours are more transparent and some colours are more opaque. So when you're working with them on the same surface, something might cover a particular colour really well, or it might show through underneath. Like I've got here, the green is showing through underneath the yellow, and that's not a big issue particularly. I seem to have warms and cools on this, so I'm going to wash my brush. Don't forget to protect your work area when you're working with acrylic paint. So if you want to put old painting clothes on, or if you want to wear an apron, or protect your flooring or your trousers or your sleeves, go ahead. This is my old painting fleece that I'm wearing, which features in probably most of my teaching videos. What colour do I fancy? I fancy this pink actually. Yeah, so just be careful about what you're doing with your paint. So this is quite a fun way to see how colours sort of respond to each other as well. Quite nice to just experiment, and I might want to just take some of that. You might get the surface texture of your substrate sort of coming through. Like here I'm getting almost square effects, which is coming through from the surface of what I'm painting on. And again, that's absolutely fine, as long as you like that effect. If you don't like that effect, then just paint out over it. So I don't entirely dislike that, that's okay. Just move that to one side away from this other piece that I'm working on. This is where things start getting quite messy and painty. So this has picked up some blue from the piece of card I'm working on. So I might want to do something in this corner that's a bit darker. Just be careful about picking up that peach colour. Doesn't matter if you get kind of splattered areas on something that you're working on. You might even want to create some splats. Anything goes really. You can do whatever you like, whatever you feel drawn to do, just go for it. So you might want to use quite big blocky brush marks. You might want to change your brush and use something that's a bit smaller, or you might even want to pick up a palette knife and just stamp some texture in on top of what you've already created. You might want to create some shapes. I just want to have a bit of a play and see what you can actually put on there. You might want to carry on painting with the palette knife on there if you have palette knives, and this is a good opportunity to experiment. I'm just going to give my palette knife a wipe. Another thing you might want to do is to, if you have it, take a texture tool like this and then just comb through and make marks. It just adds a bit of differentiation to your surface. You can also scratch out. You can see this has started to scratch out here on this area. So I might want to go back into this one and do something in that corner. the most accurate tool I've ever used, I must say. It doesn't create particularly uniform effects. You might want to take one of the old credit cards and just use that to go over the top in particular areas, like here. You can do some quite sort of fun painting effects, and I'm quite liking the way that lower surface texture is showing through here. Or you might want to paint with a toothbrush. Kind of disturb the surface of the paint a bit. Now all the neat freaks are going to be completely cringing at this point, saying, I don't want to do this to my work. And that's fine. If you're a neat freak, select your brush of choice. You might want to use a nice neat little brush like this. You might want to just put paint in really delicately in a particular area, and that's fine. You might want to mix on the substrate. You might want to stamp with the brush and create some effects. You can create some quite nice sort of stamped effects onto things just using a brush. You might want to go back over here and neaten it up a bit using a different colour. Neaten the edge. Whatever you feel drawn to do, just play. You might create a particular blend of colours on your brush, and then you might want to just wipe that onto your work and almost use your brush as if it were a palette. You might want to create some really pale areas here. Just almost delicately tickle the surface of the canvas or whatever you're using, and see what you can actually create. So the choice is yours, really. Just play. It's a bit like the way that children approach art, in a very unthought through, playful kind of a way. And that's what we're aiming for, really. We want to just experiment and just lay down areas of colour. If you don't like it, you just paint over it. This is one of the ways that you almost discover what kind of a painter you are. You might be somebody who wants to create images of apples or trees or people. You might be someone who really enjoys abstract art or unplanned composition. You might really discover something through this, and a lot of it is the way we're wired. Some of it is kind of personal preference. But it's fun to flex things up, and particularly when you're learning, so that you can discover what kind of an artist you are. The other thing you can do when you're playing with your canvases is you can rotate them. So you can either rotate them like so, or you can go through a different kind of angle. You can do whatever you like. There are no rules with this. It's just kind of play and see. And as I say, change brush types. Paint over things that you've already painted. See what comes. Just be really experimental, because that's when interesting things happen. I like these almost sort of feathery shapes that you get, and particularly when you get lots of different colours on a brush, where you can just play. And see, I'm starting to lay these colours over the top of the previous ones, and this then starts to create different effects. I might want to go with teal and gold, or yellow, green and blue, silver. And I can do whatever I like. And you can do whatever you like. It's fun to see which colours kind of work with each other to create these different effects. I kind of almost feel like I want to put some bright pink up in this corner. It's almost creating like a border between those two. This is a very transparent colour, but this is quite an opaque colour, so if I want to almost create a border between the two, I can just load up with that darker colour. I'm not loving that particularly. I want to put some grey on. It just creates areas of visual difference. So it might look like a mess, and we might even end up covering some parts of this with the collage. It's kind of no hard or fast rules really. All we're doing is just playing and making marks. So I've managed to make them look fairly different, I think. So I do apologise if these have moved a bit on camera, because I've been picking them up and playing with them. So there we go. We've got this one, which is kind of predominantly warms. And then we've got the other one, which is kind of a mixture of warms and cools. And it completely depends on how you apply the paint, what colours you use, how you combine them, whether you mix on the surface, as to what it is that you're going to create with your compositions. The main thing you want to do is to just cover the surface really, and then see what effects you get. Just wondering if I've got anything else I can use. I've got my trusty skewer, so what I might want to do is to create some contrast here. Perhaps just putting some dots in. So these are complementary colours. So we've got the yellow and the blue. So that's quite nice. You'll need heavy body acrylic to do this. Be a bit tricky in a more sort of liquidy acrylic. So that's changed that area there. I'll just wash my trusty bamboo skewer off, and then I might want to reverse that, so to create some areas of yellow on blue. And this is where you can play with your contrast if you like particular colour combinations together. So a lot of people like yellow and grey. Personally, I'm not a massive fan of that, but I'm willing to give it a go for the sake of experimentation. So then you can just create different areas. Just play. So here I might want to put some yellow on top of the pink. Or I might want to put some yellow on the green. The more thickly you apply this, the longer it's going to take to dry. So just bear that in mind. If you're creating sort of very thick areas, this particular part of the process might take you longer. You might also want to do some more of those splatters. So if you're going to do splatters, don't use the heavy body acrylic. Use something which is lighter. Otherwise you're going to have a bit of a difficult time trying to make it actually wet enough so that it will create the effect that you want. I've actually got this raspberry colour. So if I just get my brush quite wet. careful if you are doing splatters, because you can decorate yourself in your area of work. So just be a little bit careful. And I wouldn't go mad with splatters because it can overtake things completely. There's lots of other things that you can do. Really, it's just a question of just playing and being a bit experimental. I'm trying to see if I've got any other tools. I've got some sponge, so you might even want to create like a sponged area. And this again is quite textural. But it's just another way to kind of overlay colour and to create texture. And if you don't like the effect you've created, then you can always go over the top or paint it out or whatever you want to do, really. Just managed to smudge my splatters down here, so I'm just sponging them. Don't worry if you have a bit of an issue with something. That sponge is quite nice, actually. I think the sponge in small amounts is quite nice. Just lightly. It's quite subtle, actually. Might want to sort of sponge in a different colour as well. And your sponge effect will be different if you use something which is very heavy bodied or something which is very liquid. You will get slightly different effects. It's actually quite fun. It's very much like being at play school though. But hey, we have to have fun lessons sometimes, otherwise it all gets a bit too technical, and not everybody likes it when it's technical. Some people like to let go and just play with colour and experiment with different textures and think about the colour wheel. You can get to the point here, by the way, where you go a bit crazy and you end up with too much. So we don't want to go too mad. We just want to kind of play and experiment with what we have. This one's probably a bit too busy for my liking, to be honest. So, I mean, if it does get a bit too busy, you can always paint back over or kind of create a new effect even. So I might want to just take that out. Might want to use a smaller brush even. Perhaps put some yellow here. To be a little bit careful as to what you're mixing on the canvas, otherwise you can end up with some very odd colours. But you know, if you don't like something, just paint it back out again. If the paint's thick enough, you're using quite heavy body paint, it will cover it. As I say, the heavier you apply it, the longer it's going to take to dry. Say, for example, I don't know, I wanted it to be more like it was. I might want to come back in with the turquoise, tealy turquoise colour, whatever you prefer to call it. Actually preferring that. Not loving this area here either, so I might want to just see what effects I get if I change it and create some directional lines. So nothing's set in stone. You can always wait for it to dry, or you can just paint over it while it's wet. See what you get. I'm not sure I'm loving that either. It's a bit twee. So if you remember when we first came to the canvas and we just laid colour down, if you don't like what you create, then just go back over it in the same way that you did when you started. And in that way you can recreate the bits that you do like. You don't have to be stuck with bits that you don't like. I quite like this goldy colour here actually. That sort of golden yellowy colour is quite nice. Quite like that. So put more of what you do want down and less of what you don't want. If you've created areas you don't like, cover them. I'm using a more sort of thicker dry brush, textured brush type thing here. So this is kind of an evolving process. You don't have to stay with what you created. You can crisscross strokes, you can go back over things, you can leave bits showing through. It's entirely up to you how you want to put things on your work. And just because things are warms and cools doesn't mean you can't play with them in an exercise like this. You can still go over and do different things. So I think what I might do is leave these to dry, and then I might just work over the top. I might add some dark or light values to them. At the moment I've still got lots of paint here, so I might find a way of using that up in the interim as well. But I'll leave this video here and then come back for the next one.